Yeah, hi JSCM community. We have a special guest here today, Tima Bansal. Tima, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself a bit? Telling the SCM community who you are, what you're doing?
I'm a professor at the Ivey Business School in London, Canada, and I am a strategy and sustainability professor. I've been at this for about 30 years, and so deeply, deeply committed to sustainability.
Yeah, you are doing great stuff, and much of this is also related to actually what the ambition is of JSCM, challenging a bit, not just a bit, challenging quite a lot the way how we are doing management research, supply chain management research. So you're talking a lot about complexity in your work. Can you tell us a bit about this? What has been happening in the space for the last few years, decades maybe?
I think to understand where I am now, it might be helpful just to talk a little bit about my trajectory. I started, like I said, 30 years ago in much more of what is now considered traditional approaches to environmental management. So really interested in the risks and maybe even some of the economic payoffs of sustainability. So in the dominant paradigm. And then about 20 years ago, I think I started to recognize the importance of time, specifically short-termism, in inhibiting firms from engaging in sustainability. My research naturally moved then to space, or the notion of being local versus global. And so I sort of flirted with this, the area of international management, recognizing that multinationals were also part of the difficulties or challenges that come with sustainability, and then finally in scale. So as we try to scale up faster and faster, that it also is harder to be sustainable or care about the natural environment. Naturally, those dimensions of time, space, and scale moved me into systems thinking. And that's my more recent initiatives, ventures, and really excited about how a systems lens changes the way that we look at business generally. And it provides, I think, a pathway to sustainability.
How did you end up thinking about systems? So was it in the management literature where you discovered this, or was it outside of it? Or what was the first touch point with
I think it was even during my doctoral work, which was at the University of Oxford in the mid-1990s. And I, at that point, asked my supervisor, why do we have all these boxes and arrows? And he just said, that's the way science is. And it always seemed to be that I believe that we were in these interactions and you couldn't really split things up into nice, neat variables. And then I think a few years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years into my PhD as a professor, I learned about complexity sciences. And I loved the ideas, but really didn't know how to move it forward. It wasn't until more recent times that I started to find pathways to move it forward. And similar to your work, I think about a decade ago, I came up against panarchy and the idea of resiliency and more dynamic thinking that was really brought from socioecology, as you know, and that can inform a lot of what we do in management studies, but it hasn't yet had much of an impact. And so your work has been really influential as well in the space of systems thinking and complexity.
Yeah, actually, we share, I think, a bit of this path, because also my PhD was using structure equation models, regression models, boxes, arrows, and I still really like that I did that back then. But I feel that I deliberated myself a bit from that, also by reading a lot outside, a lot of theories outside of the disciplines that shaped management thinking, and yeah, social ecology played a big role. Resilience also, already during my PhD, there was this, what I would now call, like Holling called it, engineering resilience. And then over time, I realized ecological thinking brings a dynamic perspective into it. Also, sociology or sociological thinking then brings into the discipline new narratives.
What other disciplines, though? You said that there's other disciplines that we could bring in. Are there any others that you think are important?
I mean, I think in general, all disciplines can shape our thinking. So my background is actually computer science. That's where I started. So very math focused. And I still use this quite often. So to structure things, but sometimes you also deliberately need to destroy things just to create a new narrative and shape the world and transform the world. So I think math, engineering, all this is important. Ecology is important. Sociology is important. Philosophy is important in this era of populism where tech billionaires shape our thinking, or politicians shape our thinkings, or university hierarchies shape our thinking. There it's important to break out and take leadership. And I think for this, we need philosophy as well, humanities.
I agree. I think that systems thinking also is one of the few theoretical foundations that cut across almost all disciplines, art, agriculture, architecture, across the board. I think that there's a real orientation to seeing things differently. And I think in management, because I'm a strategy scholar, in management, what we try to do is have more certainty. So we try to build models so that we can predict and control the future. And that's what business education is really about, is trying to predict and then control the outcomes, whether it's greater employee satisfaction, greater organizational profits or performance, or even if it's in natural environment, better environmental solutions. It's this orientation towards modeling and prediction. But in a world that's so systemic, in a world that's just so chaotic, in fact, right now, I think that's much more important that we change that paradigm. And we cannot model or predict and control. We need something new. And I think that there is a real uptick in interest in systems thinking. But what's interesting to me is that it hasn't really moved forward in significant ways since the 1990s. So, you got Donella Meadows' book, you got Peter Senge's book, Systems Thinking, and then Fifth Discipline. But since then, we have really moved towards adapting those ideas to management studies, but not really pushing the thinking. And I think that there's this opportunity space for us right now as scholars to understand what this means, what systems thinking or systems theorizing means to management.
I see the same opportunity because I also see more and more articles. You're part of a bigger movement. You're playing a huge role in this, where management scholars are now really taking leadership also in publications. It's still a niche in a way, but it's really getting a good traction now. And I see the same in supply chain management, where we also maybe 20 years ago suddenly had a movement where complex adaptive systems thinking like Choi and Dooley and others, they brought it into the discipline. And I think it reshaped the way we thought about supply chains. And then panarchical thinking is moving out of the supply chain and connecting it with the rest of the world, with society, with environment. So I think this is so needed now. I mean, we have an environmental crisis around us, a societal crisis, a political crisis, a polycrisis, and connected thinking is needed more than ever before. So these, exactly what you also criticized, thinking in boxes, in arrows, is super important in certain areas. So we can find out, and we still need to find out new things using these tools, but we also need to zoom out. So we need probably both, and take a look at the bigger picture, but also not forget, of course, the smaller pictures. What do you think?
I think that there's a real opportunity, once again, a challenge, especially for people in management studies or supply chains operations. In a lot of systems work, whether it's in ecology or biology or even philosophy, there's this orientation of looking at the system. And so governments and NGOs have often looked at applied systems thinking. What we don't have is a really good understanding of how organizations within a system can be agentic and look at the system, as you've said, this more macro systems, while at the same time achieving their own goals. And that's a really hard thing to do, is to be able to shift across levels of analysis really smoothly, because in management or business schools, we have almost selectively focused on a single level of analysis.
Yes. what inspires me, or what has been inspiring me recently, is social innovation. It's an old literature, but there's a lot of things that I've discovered there, but also social tipping point literature, which is, I don't know how new that literature is. It's pretty recent that a lot of good contributions can be seen, often outside of management journals, actually. But especially there, I see this opportunity. How can small changes, let's say, in a company, move to the supply chain, move to the rest of the world? How can we actually really make a transformative change in this direction?
Yeah. And I think that it requires a different way of thinking and teaching our students even. Because when I go into a case classroom, let's say I'm teaching, it used to be that I would go in there and say, okay, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve in the case? What's the issue? And then we would ultimately move through a guided process of here's what the organization did, or here's the answer. We talk about cracking the case. I think that a systems approach recognizes that there's multiple problems, multiple perspectives, multiple solutions, and that we shouldn't be looking for that one answer. We should be looking at this ecology of solutions that can move us towards a more resilient, prosperous, and sustainable systems. And so then if we start to look at this notion of adaptive design, then we're starting to be much more oriented towards the single nudges, as well as then, if we're talking about design, an idealized future of where we want to be. And I think that this notion of looking near and far simultaneously is something we're not used to doing, as well as looking at our own organization and the macro system simultaneously. That ability to do both is really unusual for us. And I would say that I'm not even sure that we in management studies or supply chain management have understood theoretically what this means. But the really good news is I think that we're moving that way. And, we're seeing a lot more research on prefigurative theorizing, on prospective theorizing, on performativity, all these ideas that are much more about anticipation or the future than the past predicting the future, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean, because I think we used to, or we keep taking picture of reality. We are studying best practices, we're studying solutions, but that means we, by design, by research design, study what others, companies have already done. So we take this super neutral perspective outside, take a picture of reality, and then say we're neutral academics.
That's right, yeah.
Instead of trying to shape that and moving from being a researcher to being a scholar. So academic understanding also shifts. And I think what ecological systems thinking also, what that teaches us is every solution creates a new problem, because the world is so complex that you can't isolate problems from the rest of the world. So of course we can make the supply chain more efficient. That's a solution. But it at the same time means somewhere else on the planet, this creates problems. This creates social problems, ecological problems, political problems, cultural problems, and they're all interconnected. So that's why I totally agree and like what you're doing. Maybe can you tell, as a last word, maybe in this video, can you tell the supply chain management discipline what you think could be, in methodological terms or theoretical terms, could be something that they might look into that could be interesting in the next few years, or something that you are seeing on the horizon, maybe?
I don't know if I can predict the future. That's exactly what I
watch this
worry
video in a
against.
few years.
That's right. I know that I've been immersed in this literature more recently because I'm on sabbatical, and there's it's clear to me that we have two different paradigms in systems thinking. Now, Churchman and Michael Jackson have talked about this, but that there's hard systems and soft systems approaches. And I think that what they didn't do deeply enough, and that we, I think, need to think more seriously about, is recognizing that taking a hard systems approach means that we have a very positivist orientation. We're still looking for an answer, it's still grounded in science. A soft systems approach is more intersubjective, it's much more relational, it's much more about perspective perspective mattering. And it's the processes of understanding systems as opposed to what the answer is. I think that those two present almost two ends of the spectrum. What would be really interesting in terms of where we take things further forward is to find the integrating space between those two.
Yeah.
So that the hard systems can inform us with some answers, with some knowledge around the real ontologies of what we see in the system. And the soft systems people recognize that our perspective matters in that real ontology. So there is climate out there. We are seeing climate change. So there is a hard reality that I think the hard systems folks can help us with. But then there's also the soft systems epistemology that will tell us about how we act with those climate changes. Depends on the perspective that we hold. And until we embrace both simultaneously, I don't think that we will be able to really move forward on these on this frontier. So where do I think that the field could or should go? Is I'd love to have some dialogue, bringing the best of both to bear, even though they're arguably incommensurable. I think that they can both inform a better future for all.
I think that was a really great last word. A better future for all. So thank you so much for being here in our video series, and yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andreas.